The ornate light fixtures of Windsor Castle shimmered on that November night, throwing flickering silhouettes upon countenances paralyzed by shock. An occasion intended as a sophisticated charitable feast honoring decades of imperial duty was destined to transform into the most theatrical display of authority the British sovereign house had seen in ages. For within the succeeding minute, Prince William, the prospective monarch of England, would perform the unimaginable by personally commanding his stepmother's child to depart. Supported by the single royal nobody risks challenging, Princess Anne herself. This did not represent a fleeting error in reasoning. Nor was it court etiquette gone awry, rather. It was a deliberate demonstration of resistance that would reveal the fissures traversing the very bedrock of the Windsor family. By the hour the dawn broke the following day, the meticulously assembled facade of imperial harmony would exist in wreckage. Yet what could compel a future sovereign to enact such an open exhibition of dominance? What ancient pact was being upheld? And why would Princess Anne, the crown's most regimented protector, align with William as he etched a boundary in the Windsor dust? The solution rests hidden within a clandestine missive from Queen Elizabeth II personally. Hushed arguments behind castle portals, and a quiet battle being fought for the very spirit of the British throne. Prior to us disclosing this remarkable saga of fidelity, treachery, and royal judgment, ensure you are subscribed. For what you are about to find will alter everything you believed you understood regarding the contemporary sovereign institution. The ambiance within Windsor Castle that night was dense with unvoiced strain. Court assistants navigated with uncommon speed, their expertly impassive faces revealing tiny fractures of anxiety. The roster of attendees for this philanthropic dinner had been the topic of intense dispute for weeks. Yet King Charles had rendered his verdict. Camilla's child, Laura Lopez, would be present as a signal of domestic accord. It was intended to be figurative, a civic illustration that the merged royal clan had reached a tranquil togetherness that was contemporary, encompassing, and forward-thinking. However, to Prince William, it signified something far more perilous, specifically the silent decay of limits his grandmother had dedicated 70 years to defending. From the instant Laura walked into the magnificent room in her stylish formal dress, beaming politely at officials and charity donors, William's attitude altered. Individuals stationed close to the main table would subsequently recount his gaze tightening and his jaw hardening ever so slightly. It resembled the expression of a male who had already reached a conclusion, perhaps days or even weeks prior to this instance. The feast continued with all the rehearsed elegance the crown is renowned for. As bands performed, lights danced, and champagne glasses rang in meticulously scheduled salutes. Nevertheless, under the surface of sophistication, something essential was moving. Laura Lopez, to her merit, seemed entirely oblivious to the mute tempest forming across the hall. She engaged in courteous dialogue, stood for pictures, and conducted herself with the rehearsed comfort of an individual who had become accustomed to royal spheres. Yet that ease, that informal nearness to the throne, was exactly what William deemed unbearable. For him, every image, every chat, and every minute she passed in Windsor's corridors transmitted an unvoiced signal that Camilla's kin were being raised into zones kept for those birthed of imperial blood. And within that promotion, he perceived the hazardous undoing of centuries of rigorously upheld structure. As the night progressed, dialogues became progressively awkward, attendants evaded visual connection, and even the international officials, unacquainted with the nuanced tides of court maneuvering, could feel that something was deeply amiss. Then arrived the instant that would echo throughout royal chronicles. William bent towards his private assistant, a reliable character who had attended him for ages, and murmured a few calculated terms. His pitch was stable, conclusive, and ultimate. There existed no rage in his vocalization, merely command. Inside of minutes, the assistant walked up to Laura Lopez with the maximum prudence. The dialogue was short, nearly regretful, yet the notification was transparent. Her attendance was no longer solicited. The great room appeared to suspend its respiration. Laura paused, with bewilderment dancing across her visage, wondering if this was some sort of error or a timing clash. However, the assistant's professional manner offered no space for inquiries. This was not a plea, this was a royal decree. As Laura was silently guided toward a lateral hallway, the atmosphere in Windsor Castle turned nearly choking. No tones were elevated, No spectacle was created, yet the quietness itself was ear-splitting. A freezing illustration that dominance does not always bellow, as occasionally it whispers. Situated unobtrusively close to the imperial table, Princess Anne watched the whole interaction. And subsequently, at the exact second Laura vanished from sight, Anne performed an action that would validate everybody's direst hunches regarding what had just occurred. She gestured with a nod. It was hardly noticeable, a faint motion of her cranium that endured less than a second. Yet to those who grasped court forces, that lone signal was a catastrophic explosive. Princess Anne, the throne's most rigid protector of custom, had just openly supported her nephew's deed of rebellion. This was not rash. This was not an error. This was designed, reckoned, and carried out with medical exactness. Across the room, Queen Consort Camilla's visage emptied of pigment. She had been in the middle of a dialogue with an official when news arrived to her of what had just happened. Her child, her own kin and lineage, had been banished from a royal function, not owing to any disgrace or indecency, but merely because Prince William had determined she did not fit. To Camilla, it was shame masked as etiquette. Years of meticulously constructing connections, of battling for inclusion, of attempting to weave her clan into the imperial framework, were all unmade in a solitary destructive instant. The rest of the night was a seminar in British discipline. Grins stayed pinned, chats persisted, and the philanthropic labor was properly honored. Yet everybody in that room realized they had seen something momentous. A public crack in the allegedly joined face of the Windsor clan. By the hour the last visitors left Windsor Castle that evening, the palace media squad was already in emergency posture. However, restraining this narrative would turn out to be impossible. For by dawn, murmurs had transformed into banners, and conjecture had turned into disgrace. To comprehend why Prince William adopted such a theatrical position, you must grasp the years of boiling strain that came before it. Well prior to the Windsor event, William had become aggressively uneasy with what he personally termed the obscuring of lines. Beneath the courteous grins at family reunions, he nursed profound worries regarding Camilla's slow insertion of her offspring into imperial existence. This was not private hatred toward Laura or Tom Parker Bowles, as William had consistently been polite and even friendly toward his stepmother's kin. However, politeness and admission are not identical to parody, and that nuance mattered deeply to him. William had matured observing his mother, Princess Diana, steer through the savage maneuvers of court life, a lady who held authentic royal blood but was handled as dispensable. The paradox was not missed by him that decades afterward, persons lacking any royal ancestry were being given entry and sway his mother had been refused. Yet William's worries went further than private pasts. He trusted with a nearly spiritual certainty that the crown's validity leaned on one immovable base: ancestry. Not fondness, not matrimony, not contemporary concepts of openness, but blood. This conviction was strengthened by the single individual whose view counted more to him than anybody else's. Princess Anne. Anne had been observing Camilla's consistent rise with increasing fright. Every picture of Laura at a royal function, every reference of Tom in court groups, and every slight standardization of their attendance. Anne viewed it all as a perilous standard being established, and distinct from her sibling Charles, who prized peace over rank. Anne declined to stay mute. In confidential dialogues with William, Anne had been direct. Your grandmother dedicated 70 years to shielding what renders this establishment holy. She allegedly stated to him, if we permit ancestries to become debatable, we betray everything she constructed. Those phrases vibrated with William in ways nothing else could. For Anne was not talking from aspiration or envy. She possessed no wish for increased authority or fame. She was talking from sheer unspoiled dedication to doctrine. And in an establishment increasingly steered by public optics and modern feelings. That sort of principled lucidness was scarce. Jointly, they started to view themselves not as insurgents, but as protectors. Court insiders would subsequently name them the mute reformers. Two royals joined by their resolve to keep tradition in an era eager to discard it. Yet their worries were not solely theoretical, as there were functional factors as well. Every imperial function possesses significance. Every picture transmits a signal. And every civic showing strengthens specific stories while lessening others. When Laura Lopez showed up at prominent royal duties, It broadcasted an undeniable cue to the British populace. She was being placed as a component of the royal clan proper, not merely linked to it by wedding vows. William viewed this as tactical. He trusted Camilla was involved in what he termed heritage construction, cautiously and systematically normalizing her children's nearness to the throne so that upcoming generations would regard them as valid participants of the royal household. And he was not completely incorrect. Camilla, following surviving decades of civic aggression and press demonization, frantically desired admission, not merely for herself but for her offspring. She wished for them to be viewed not as trespassers or difficulties, but as prized participants of a widened, updated royal clan. Every summons, every snapshot, and every polite public instant was a segment of that broader plan. However, what Camilla viewed as mending and embrace, William and Anne viewed as decay and peril. The strain had been mounting for years, showing itself in tiny ways. Visitor rosters that turned into topics of hushed arguments, placement charts that ignited dispute, and picture chances that were meticulously regulated. Every case was tiny enough to be brushed aside as etiquette trivia. But together they exposed a foundational discord regarding the monarchy's future path. And subsequently arrived the St. James Gathering, the instant when theoretical discord solidified into active defiance. It was 3 days prior to the Windsor feast when Prince William and Princess Anne convened privately in the guarded rooms of St. James's Palace. The gathering was not on any formal agenda. No assistants were present, and no logs were maintained. Yet what happened in that chamber would change the path of royal chronicles. Per sources who assembled the events later, William and Anne formed a treaty. Never once more would royal ranks, functions, or organizational sway be stretched to non-lineage family members without their combined endorsement. They were not orchestrating a takeover, they were creating what they deemed to be requisite safety barriers. Principles that would defend the throne from what they regarded as the slow degradation of its most vital trait. Its holy bloodline. Anne, always the tactician, described the circumstance with savage lucidness. Your dad is forming choices centered on private ease rather than institutional honesty. She allegedly told William, if we do not move presently, the monarchy your grandmother erected will be undistinguishable within a generation. William required no persuasion, as he had come to the gathering already dedicated to action. That which he required from Anne was not authorization. It was alliance. And in that secluded room beneath likenesses of Windsor forebears stretching back centuries, they forged a union grounded on mutual belief. They termed it the St. James's Accord. Although that title would never show in any formal paper, it was an ethical agreement, a pledge to one another and to the doctrines they trusted Queen Elizabeth II had personified. The accord had various pivotal stipulations. Firstly, no person lacking a direct ancestral bond to the Windsor clan would obtain summons to mandated royal duties without combined conference between William and Anne. Secondly, any growth of royal titles or authorized validation would necessitate their sanction regardless of the monarch's wishes. Thirdly, they would mutually supervise the guarding of what they termed lineage purity, guaranteeing that public view remained distinct about who held true royal status versus who was linked via matrimony. It was daring in any other setting as it might have been deemed disloyal. Two royals creating authority that overrode the king's own discretion. But William and Anne did not view it that way. They trusted they were moving in protection of an organization larger than any person, including Charles himself. What they were erecting was nothing short of a phantom administration framework. An informal veto strength over royal strategy that would stay unseen to the populace but would fundamentally alter palace mechanics. And they were poised to trial it. However, William and Anne's certainty was not grounded purely on their own assessment. They possessed something more potent. The understood benediction of Queen Elizabeth II herself. Amid the commemorative inspection of Queen Elizabeth's private records, a secluded audit performed after her passing, a shut missive was found wrapped in her distinct paper. It carried nearly 2 terms on the cover, for continuity. Originally, royal record keepers presumed it was symbolic, perhaps concluding notions intended to console her successors. Yet when Princess Anne perused its substance, she recognized it was something far more momentous. A caution. The note's precise phrasing remains protected, but per those who possess awareness of its text, Queen Elizabeth wrote clearly regarding the perils of permitting comfort to slide into obligation, and of how ranks and lineages are wholly responsibilities, not conveniences of fondness. Most compellingly, she cautioned that validity is not heir through connection, but by birthright and persistence. To Anne, these phrases were visionary, as the Queen had predicted exactly the quandary now confronting the crown. The slow decay of distinct limits between those born to govern and those who arrived via matrimony. Anne preserved the note in secret for over a year, believing its signal was intended as direction, not weaponry for family strife. However, after observing the normalization of Camilla's offspring at royal functions and after seeing William's increasing annoyance, Anne reached a conclusion. She revealed the letter to William. The effect was deep, as William, who had been struggling with remorse over his adverse sentiments toward the circumstance, abruptly felt justified. His grandmother, the lady whose view counted more than any other, had basically ratified his worries. "You have performed what she would have desired," Anne reportedly stated to him after he scanned the letter. "And now you must carry it to completion." The missive became their ethical pillar, as it was not merely their view anymore. It was Queen Elizabeth's volition. And that nuance counted massively within the palace ladder. When King Charles eventually discovered the letter's reality, sources claim he was rattled. He read it not as advice but as scolding, a signal from beyond the tomb doubting the encompassing method he had toiled years to construct. For Charles, who had spent his whole existence pursuing his mother's endorsement, the note felt like a concluding letdown. Even in passing, she appeared to be aligning against the family oneness he frantically wished to reach. But for William and Anne, it was confirmation. They were not insurgents, they were loyal attendants to the Queen's dream. Every determination they took from that moment onward was, in their thoughts, proceeding with her labor. The letter changed their pact from private belief into sacred obligation, and that feeling of duty would bear William through what arrived subsequently. The standoff with his father. It was the night prior to the Windsor feast when William showed up unannounced at Clarence House. His arrival took the palace completely by surprise. King Charles was amidst final arrangements, and etiquette dictated that such appointments ought to be booked beforehand. Yet William was not present for etiquette, he was there to sketch a border. The showdown started softly, with William, poised but determined, making his stance plain. Laura Lopez ought not attend the Windsor charity dinner, as her attendance at such a high-visibility function was unfitting and dispatched the incorrect signal regarding royal order. Charles, tired from years of domestic strain and keen to project oneness, declined. "She is kin," he maintained, "and this is regarding demonstrating that we have advanced past ancient splits." "No," William answered, his vocal tone steady, "this is regarding sustaining clarity. The crown is not determined by whom we fancy or whom we wed, it is determined by blood. And that separation must stay total." The dispute intensified as Charles, shielding both his spouse and his dream for a contemporary throne, grew progressively annoyed. He charged William with adhering to obsolete notions and ruining family bonds for the sake of imagery. But William stood solid, speaking not as a boy but as the prospective monarch, his pitch bearing a command that even his father could not totally brush off. Then Princess Anne came into the chamber, and her entrance altered everything. Anne possessed a talent for slicing through emotional static to reach the heart of a matter. And when she talked, it was with the identical lucidness that had characterized her whole royal profession. "The issue, Charles, is that you are forming choices grounded on private joy rather than organizational honesty. Mother grasped the distinction, William grasps it, and I am fearful you do not." It was a crushing evaluation, made worse by its tranquil delivery. Charles attempted to shield his stance, but he was now outnumbered, not by might but by belief. William and Anne symbolized something he could not oppose, an uninterrupted connection to his mother's tenets. Camilla came in halfway through the trade, trying to arbitrate, but she rapidly found herself facing the identical unyielding barrier. When she begged for comprehension, reasoning that her child's attendance was benign, William replied with freezing simplicity, "It is not regarding harm. It is regarding ladder, and that is not debatable." The showdown hit its emotional apex when Camilla, swamped by the realization that she was waging a fight already forfeited, collapsed in tears and exited the room. The quietness that ensued was stifling. For the primary time since his ascension, King Charles faced open resistance from both his successor and his sibling. A grouping so potent it menaced the very base of his rule. Eventually searching for some route toward truce, Charles tendered a bargain where Laura could attend but she would stay in the periphery. Not conspicuously highlighted, William and Anne agreed, but solely on the surface. Privately, William read this as silent authorization to impose his own criteria if she crossed the line. The platform had been arranged, the king's tentative sanction, Anne's steadfast backing, and William's mute determination crafted the ultimate tempest that would burst at Windsor. In the days ensuing the Windsor banishment, the palace communications office confronted an unexampled emergency. Yet the assaults did not originate from outside detractors. They came from inside the royal residence itself. Meticulously scheduled drips began drowning tabloids and news providers. Nameless court insiders depicted William as vicious and power-hungry, while Princess Anne was described as icy and vengeful. The story being built was plain. William had shamed a guiltless lady to satiate his antiquated views of royal order. The vocabulary utilized across multiple outlets was strikingly similar, with phrases like emotional queen consort, unfair handling, and taut mood appearing repeatedly, suggesting orchestrated messaging rather than natural reporting. William's squad rapidly tracked the origins. Various royal assistants with recognized links to Camilla's media contact had been in touch with reporters merely days before the leaks commenced. This was not impulsive outrage, it was tactical revenge. Headlines yelled about Prince William's ego trip and Anne the enforcer inside the royal Chile war. Every piece contorted the Windsor event into a tale of brutality rather than doctrine. The populace, starving for royal theater, consumed every word. Social platforms exploded with argument. Observers picked apart every slant, most without grasping the deeper constitutional queries at risk. Inside the castle, disorder ruled. Senior officials rushed to handle the emergency. But every bid at damage limitation seemed to worsen matters. When King Charles issued a carefully phrased declaration asking for unity and empathy, it was instantly read by the media as a hidden scolding of his own boy. The banner that followed, claiming Charles was distancing himself from William's deeds, sparked a fresh surge of guessing about cracks within the throne itself. Camilla, meanwhile, was placed by her backers as the warm, misread modern royal battling to humanize an organization stuck in history. The paradox was deep. The lady once demonized as the destroyer of royal purity was now being recast as its emotional rescuer. William picked silence as his tactic, realizing that engaging directly would only feed the blaze. But privately, he was readying something far more potent than a defensive reply. He was preparing to define himself on his own terms. When Prince William ultimately spoke publicly, it was not in the shape of a defensive media release or a damage limitation interview. It was a stiff broadcasted address, the sort kept for moments of national import. Sitting next to Princess Anne, William delivered what would turn into one of the defining orations of his future rule. The throne rests not on ease but on dedication, he commenced, his voice stable and distinct. It survives not owing to private connections but owing to holy liability handed from generation to generation through blood and task. To millions viewing, it sounded like a rousing defense of custom. But to those inside the castle, every term was a reckoned signal. The crown is not inherited via affection, William continued, but through lineage, through service, and through the persistence of those born to bear its mass. He never cited Camilla. He never referenced the Windsor event. And he did not need to. The message was crystal clear. Beside him, Princess Anne's subtle nods of validation spoke volumes. This was not a son apologizing for crossing a line. This was a future king defining his tenets. The phrase commitment to lineage became the center of immediate national debate. Traditionalists praised it as a return to correct values, while modernists critiqued it as obsolete and restrictive. But for Camilla watching from Windsor, it landed like a blade. What the Globe heard as royal rhetoric, she heard as permanent banishment. The speech verified her worst dread, that regardless of her title, and regardless of her years beside the king, her family would always stay peripheral, tolerated but never truly equal. King Charles's response was revealing, as watchers noted the tension in his look as his son spoke. The agony of a dad trapped between lineage fidelity and affection for his wife was scribed across his visage. He recognized in that instant that his son's sense of fate had outgrown his own prudence. William was no longer merely the heir, he had become the flag-bearer of an older, more rigid form of monarchy. Sources close to Camilla disclosed that she departed immediately after the broadcast. Withdrawing into seclusion, "It is his crown now," she reportedly told an assistant. And he has made that clear. In the weeks after William's address, palace forces settled into a new arrangement. One that admitted, even if never publicly confessed, that authority had moved. The St. James Accord, once a covert pact between William and Anne, had effectively become functioning policy. Visitor rosters for major royal functions now passed through extra tiers of review. Decisions regarding titles and official validation faced unmatched inspection. King Charles, acknowledging the pointlessness of fighting a battle that would only deepen public splits, quietly submitted to this new reality. His reign would be defined not by the inclusive dream he had hoped for, but by a compromise with forces he could not fully command. Camilla found herself in an impossible spot. Queen consort in name but restricted in sway. Her children continued to keep a respectful span from the most prominent royal events, a distance now imposed by unspoken but understood laws. Princess Anne, meanwhile, took on a widened part as what insiders termed the guardian of protocol, a post that gave her extraordinary sway over the monarchy's path without needing any formal rank or public credit. And William, he arose from the scandal not weakened but fortified. Yes, he faced critique. Yes, he was termed cruel and cold-hearted. But he had also displayed something pivotal, that he possessed the belief and bravery to make tough choices in defense of principles. To those who would eventually serve in his reign, the Windsor event became a defining instant, proof that the future King William V would not be a monarch who governed by consensus or popularity, but by unyielding commitment to what he believed the monarchy must be. The lesson was clear. In the House of Windsor, not all crowns are intended to be shared. What this implies for the future is that the Windsor banquet expulsion was not just about one night or one individual. It was regarding the foundational query facing all modern kingdoms. Can archaic institutions built on ancestry survive in an era that prizes openness? William and Anne responded to that query with a loud declaration, yes. But only if they declined to compromise their essential character. Whether that dream can sustain the monarchy through the 21st century remains to be seen. But one thing is certain. The future of the British crown will be shaped not by those who seek to modernize it at any cost, but by those willing to defend its most controversial but foundational principle, that royal legitimacy flows not from marriage or affection, but from an unbroken line of blood stretching back through centuries. The Windsor event revealed a truth the palace had tried desperately to hide. Beneath the veneer of unity lies a fundamental divide about what the monarchy is and what it should become. And in that divide, Prince William has chosen his side. The question now is whether the British public and history itself will judge that choice as courageous conviction or tragic stubbornness. Only time will tell. But one thing is certain. When the day comes for William to place the crown upon his head, he will do so not as a king who compromised for comfort, but as one who fought at great personal cost for what he believed was right. And whether you agree with him or not, that kind of conviction is precisely what defines a monarch. The monarchy will never be the same. The battle lines have been drawn. And as we have witnessed, when Prince William draws a line, even kings must respect it. What do you think about Prince William's bold stand? Was it an act of courage or cruelty? Do you believe the monarchy should prioritize bloodline over inclusivity? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear from you. If you found this deep dive into royal drama as fascinating as we did, make sure to like this video, share it with anyone who loves royal news, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another explosive royal revelation. Hit that notification bell to stay updated on all the latest palace secrets, scandals, and power plays. The royal story is far from over, and we will be here to bring you every shocking development. Until next time, keep watching, keep questioning, and remember, in the world of royalty, nothing is ever quite as it seems.